Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Williams, Adult and Community Services Manager for the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn, where we'll be learning about the state of agriculture, we'll be learning about the state of agriculture in Boone County and beyond. And today's Lunch and Learn is co-hosted by the library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. Before we begin the program, just a couple of Zoom housekeeping items. We've got a couple of ways you can ask questions of our presenter today. You can use the chat feature of Zoom by hovering over your Zoom window and looking for that speech bubble chat icon and the other tools at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap in the middle of your screen to have those tools or menu appear. If you want to unmute and ask your question or participate in discussion, you can click the raise hand tool, which is right there next to the chat on your Zoom toolbar. And that will let me know you'd like me to unmute you so that you can ask a question during the Q&A portion of the program. We are recording today's presentation, so it will be available in a couple of days on the library's YouTube channel and the League of Women Voters YouTube channel for future viewing. And now I'd like to welcome our moderator, Diane Schuler with the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. Thanks, Diane. You're muted, Diane.
Yeah, okay, very good. Thank you, Lauren, and thanks to the library for hosting our Lunch and Learn sessions. They really help to get the word out and get a lot of people to learn a lot about things that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our speaker, Dr. Wyatt Thompson. Wyatt is someone I've known for many years. My husband worked with him, and it's been wonderful to watch Wyatt grow and for his career to blossom over the past 25 years. By way of introduction, Dr. Thompson is a professor of agriculture and applied economics at the University of Missouri. He joined MU in 2006 to work on biofuel market policies, agricultural policies, and trade at MU's Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute. For those of you who aren't familiar, FAPRI, the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute, is the premier national and international institute for econometric modeling of agricultural food supply, demand, and prices. FAPRI's analysis is used by countries around the world in crafting policies and programs. Just on March 30th, the Institute released its annual baseline analysis, which will inform policymakers throughout the world in agricultural planning, in particular our US Congress. So I appreciate especially Wyatt doing this, since he's just been finished coming out of a very intensive work situation, getting this baseline report out. A little background for Wyatt. Before joining the team at FAPRI, Wyatt worked at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, in Paris, France, where he analyzed export competition policies, measured agricultural policy support, and assessed markets and impacts on policy throughout the European Union, Mexico, and the United States. He also worked on similar topics at the Policy Research Institute of the Ministry of Agriculture in Tokyo, Japan, and was a research fellow of the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. During a recent sabbatical, he worked at the Office of the Chief Economist of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Wyatt earned a BS and MS in economics at Washington University in St. Louis and holds a PhD in agricultural economics at the University of Missouri. With that, I'll quit talking and turn it over to our speaker. Thank you so much for joining us, Wyatt, and we look forward to your sharing your insights into the current state of agriculture.
Thank you. Thanks, Diane, for the introduction. That's a lot to live up to. Thank you. And thank you, Lauren, for giving the space. Let me try and share the screen real fast. Let me do this. And there you go. So hopefully you see something. Good. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you very much. The state of agriculture is a huge topic, and I've gone beyond my usual areas of research to try and cover a lot of different topics. So hopefully it's more widely interesting. I don't get too much in the details on any one topic where I spent days, months, years working. So hopefully I can keep it interesting to everybody, and we can go into more detail on things during questions later on, or if you, like Lauren said, signal a question with the chat or that you want the microphone. Just generally then it's going to be a bit of a mix of topics, right? So it's, we don't need to say who I am because Diane's already covered that. But kind of what's going on right now in agricultural markets and what are the trends, and then do some policy questions at the end because this is the League of Women Voters and that seems appropriate. Like Diane said, you know who I am now, with too much detail, but to be clear, we do a policy analysis. So we give objective analysis to support decision-making. We don't give recommendations at FAPRI, where I work the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute. So my goal today is kind of the same. Here's some information that can inform your judgments about policies and what's going on in the world right now. So I'll skip this. So the discussion will mostly be about not really food and what you're eating right now, which hopefully is quite tasty, but instead about where food comes from in agriculture and agricultural trends. And I'll throw in some questions. If you were to talk to some of my students, you know I have in-class quizzes that they have to answer. And in fact, there's a test on Thursday this week for some students. I won't grade you, and you're not even required to answer. So I'll put up some questions just to give you a moment to think. So it's less listening and occasionally get to pause and see how much you know about agriculture in the US and the world. So I'm going to start with some information from the recently released Outlook that Diane mentioned. This focuses mostly on the US. There's an international one where I have a larger role that's hopefully going to come out next week, which is also coming out for international markets. But this is part of our baseline process where we look out at markets over the next 10 years. And there's a lot there about US markets and policies. And so I'll pull in just a bit of that. And again, end up with more US policy at the end. So one of the big stories is, Lauren and Diane, can you see my mouse right there? Thank you. So one of the big stories last year, you remember, is the war in Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine, and when that happened, prices went up. So here's the price of corn in dollars per bushel and price of wheat. The price of wheat going from $8 per bushel to $11. You know, $2.5 might not sound like a big amount of dollars, but there are lots of bushels of wheat in the world. And that's an increase of more than 25%. And it was pretty global. Prices in most countries went up quite a bit. And for countries where there's a lot of people who are maybe closer to poverty or in food jeopardy, food insecurity, that could matter quite a bit. The corn price and other commodity price also rose at that time in most world markets. But a key point is that since then, that peak, they've fallen off. And in more recent data, the price have settled. And in the projections we did, indeed, if you look at the futures markets now, a lot of these prices seem to be tailing off or falling in the future. And that's one of the changes relative to what people might have thought a year ago, is that a lot of these prices that were so in the news last year after the war, they've fallen off those peaks a bit. And again, the war in Russia was a big event. It affected two big agricultural producers, Russia and Ukraine. And that brings me to the first question, just see if you're awake and paying attention. So we think about Russia and Ukraine and how the war disrupted their exports. So just out of curiosity, let's think of three things: wheat, corn, and fertilizer, and the share of those two countries together in world markets. So which one was highest? Which had the highest share of world exports? Was it wheat, corn, or fertilizer for these two countries? And there's no survey answer. You have to think about it. Thank you, Lauren, for expressing that. It's a good contemplation look from Lauren. Thank you. So we have a paper coming up here by Grant et al. And so they actually did the data and they find that wheat, Russia and Ukraine together have 28% of world exports. So the war jeopardized this. For the Ukraine, it made it very hard to export. For Russia, many countries took measures to try and limit exports. In fact, Russia still exports quite a bit, but maybe not as easily. So there's a higher cost to it. For corn, mostly Ukraine, it's about 16% of world markets before the war. And for fertilizer, about 1/5, and mostly Russia. And that was a big story too that hit agricultural markets. Is not only is there a shock on the commodity markets, but also fertilizer that's used to make some of these crops. And the fertilizer shock was a big unknown for agriculture markets because that happened in spring. So you think about planting and so on and what's being produced now, that would depend on the fertilizer prices and what was happening to those. And there were other things going on too. You know, we can look at barley, a big feed grain, although many of us know better for beer, but also a feed grain, where Russia and Ukraine had a big share. Certain oil seeds, not soybeans that we grow in Missouri, which is an oil seed that you crush to make meal and oil, but sunflower seed, meal and oil, there are big shares there. And natural gas. And the natural gas share was mostly or almost all Russia, and a lot of it went to Europe. And a big story a year ago, if you remember, last spring was the natural gas use in Europe and how they were seemed desperate to get supplies. There was talk about how they depend on Russia and the risks of a cold winter and what that would do to energy markets in Europe. And as one of my colleagues here, Mark Rosenbaum at FAPRI, said, that maybe we were all saved a bit by a mild winter in Europe. That because the winter was not so severe in Europe, there was less of a surge, less demand for natural gas for heating than normal, and that helped to make it easier for Europe to keep using natural gas to make fertilizers or for electricity for industry and for other uses. And maybe that was actually a happy coincidence or happening. So nevertheless, fertilizer costs are higher than they were before the war. So here from the outlook again, we take the production costs between 2020 and 2022. So a 2-year gap from before the war to most recent. And the cost for corn production, dollars per acre, a common way to measure cost in the US. So seed about $100 and fertilizer, the blue one's the one that goes up. It goes up by $100 but over a 2-year period. So that's a pretty big jump. Soybeans doesn't use as much fertilizer, still an increase, wheat, cotton, but the corn cost certainly did rise. And the story of fertilizers is still important, right? So that's pressure on supplies. So food price inflation has also been the news over the last year or so. So food price inflation, again, from our outlook, going back 2007, you can see this is often measured as the food prices relative to what they were 1 year ago. So until this past year, they rarely increased by more than 5% from 1 year to the next. So maybe fairly stable. But last year, food price inflation for food overall, this green square, and for food at home, the blue diamond. So both about 10% or higher in 22. So in 2022, food prices went up by about a tenth higher than they were the year before. And that's slowed down. And so the year-over-year change has now fallen to maybe, well, actually it's in February, it's still pretty hot, but for the year, most people expect it to fall. As markets settle, as the post-pandemic adjustments are made and so on, supply chains return to normal. So a lot of people expect that this won't stay up 10% or more, but you have to go back a pretty long time to find food price inflation in the US that high for a while. For some of us, we might remember in the mid to early 70s, there was a time when food price inflation was, I think it hit 20% actually 1 year on average. So it has been higher in the past, but this still took everyone's breath away last year. And since then, it seems to have fallen. So when you think about the food you buy, let's think about that. So when you buy food here, when people buy food in the USA, about what share of the cost people pay goes to the agricultural commodities. So there's a chunk of what we pay that goes to all the things that happen in between the farm gate and what food you buy, right? There's processing, storing, retailing, all that going on. So there's all these other costs. So what share of the price that's paid for food goes to actual commodities on the farm? Would it be closer to 15% or a quarter of the price people pay? Or about half of what people pay for food going back to the farm commodities, the corn, the wheat, the cattle, and so on. So Economic Research Service of USDA does this for us. They've tracked this share that goes to the farm share, they call it, for the farm commodities versus the share that goes to marketing, the marketing services that happen after the farm gate, before you get food, wherever you get your food. And on average for the United States, about in the last year they had data, about 2019, about 14% or 14 cents per dollar goes to the farm commodities, and the other 86 cents went to the marketing share, all the steps that happen after the farm, before the final market sale. So this 85 cents, and this has varied, these two shares, this has gone between maybe 14 and 18% of what people spend over the last decade or so. If we go back farther in time, it could be much, much higher in the US. In some countries, it's much higher as well. But in the US, most of what we pay for when we pay for food is for things that happen after the agricultural commodities are produced and before we actually get the food. You're paying for not to chew on raw, wheat, but to have bread. Not to have bread on farm, but to have bread at the store you want it in Colombia. Maybe to have someone bring you the bread, maybe to have it packaged, and so on. So you're paying for things to be processed and moved in time and space. So you're paying for something with this. But a lot of what we pay in that food price inflation relates to this, and the biggest share of that actually goes to labor. Labor is a huge chunk of the cost of the food you pay in the United States. So when we think about the ag commodity price going up and down, we also want to think about food employment and labor market events as being important in determining the food price inflation over time. And where do we buy food? So in the past, when we think about total expenditures on food in the US, it's been rising over time in nominal terms. And the share of food that people buy away from home has been growing faster than what people buy at home. They both grew, but a large and larger share has been food away from home. Grocery stores being food home, restaurants and so on be food away from home. And that share has been rising over time. So quick question, if you look at the graph in 2020, there was a drop in both, but particular in the food away from home. That's where most of the drop was. This part actually increased. So have food away from home expenditures, this part, recovered since the pandemic? We do have one more year of data. We have 21 data already, thanks to Economic Research Service. So it has this orange, yellow, whatever color that is, food away from home. Do you think it's recovered to what it was before the pandemic, or has it remained below? So recovered. So food away from home, I've just got the last few years here. So it crosses $1 trillion of expenditure on food away from home. It dropped during the pandemic by 13%. And in 21, it already not only recovered to the level before, it actually passed it. Food at home grew as well in 21, but not as fast. That 8% increase was pretty big compared to previous increases. There was a huge shift in what people ate during the pandemic, from food away from home to food at home, in terms of values and also volumes. There were any number of stories about how the volumes of people used to buy in restaurants being moved to be purchased at home or to food banks or some other mechanism. And maybe to you 8% change and minus 13% change don't sound big, but it was a huge shift in how food was delivered to people. It's pretty amazing that it happened, and it's already partly unwound in a sense, or even more than unwound. So we seem to have gone back to the old trend. Whatever happened, it seems to have passed. So some broad looks at agriculture and food. Now we're Bill is also talking about Boone County, which I don't normally research, but I know a place where we can get some stuff about Boone County. So the University of Missouri also covers that. So I do have a question about Boone County in here, just to make sure you know your county. So again, I'm going to have to borrow people's numbers, but let's consider the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So how many of you have heard of SNAP? The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is a big food nutrition program in the US in terms of expenditures. And we'll talk a bit more about that under policy. It used to be called food stamps, but it's SNAP is the program. It's been SNAP for a while, so I probably should stop saying formally food stamps. But let's think about the last year we have for this comparison is 2018, and we can compare the Boone County numbers to the Missouri state averages. So think about how many people participate in SNAP. What share of people overall and the people under 18 do you think was higher or lower in Boone County than the state? I have a vote. Thank you, Lauren. And Lauren's right. So for overall participation in SNAP, for Boone County, 9%, for Missouri average, 12% in 2018. For people under 18 years old, 20% in Boone County and 24% in the state. Good job, Lauren. You get an A. So this is just some of the data from Missouri Hunger Atlas and from the food insecurity numbers at the University of Missouri more generally. They have this website you can go to where you can get more information, but I love the food hunger atlas for every county in the state. You can pull up a fact sheet. You have food insecurity measures up here about eligibility for different government programs, for example. You have assistance, including the two numbers I pulled. Here's the total percent of total population participating in SNAP and the percent of people under 18. Free and reduced lunch enrollment in the county versus the state. You also have here health indicators about the hypertension and diabetes prevalence, for example, and just general demographics. The population of Missouri, population of Missouri, 6 million, the county 108,000. So it's a fun place to go to see a county compared to the state average. So again, this is a great place to go if you want more on Boone County. It's not my usual area of study. So fortunately, I'm doing a survey and I don't have to spend too much time here. So a great place to go though if you want to know more about the county, Missouri, the food security work there. So that was the county. Now let's step up to the global level for undernourishment. So has global undernourishment throughout the world fallen or risen since 2000? And I ask this two ways. First, in terms of the total numbers of millions of people or hundreds of millions of people, has that number risen or fallen since 2000? And in relative terms, as a percent of the population, has the share of people who are undernourished in the world fallen since 2000 or gone up? It's a tough one. And my starting point matters. So the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations tries to estimate this. These are difficult numbers. And if you go to their website, you can learn more about how they do it. It is difficult to estimate undernourishment around the world. So these might be the best data we have, but let's accept there might be some serious imprecision. So I showed two ways. I show here the total number of human beings who suffer undernourishment in the world according to their estimates. So billions of people. So this would be 800 million people in 2000 suffered undernourishment, and it rose a bit. And then the bars fell below 600 million. And then the Great Recession kind of stagnated there for a while. And lately, the number of people suffering undernourishment has risen back up to maybe 750 million or so. So it's still less than it was in 2000, but not much. If I'd picked a different year, you'd have had to have a different answer. This is the earliest year they give me, but not necessarily the best year for the comparison you need for whatever decision you want to make with this. As far as the percent of population, so this blue line, about 13% of people were undernourished in 2000, and that number fell slowly. Fell more slowly here and actually went below 8% briefly, and since then it has picked back up. So almost 10% of people are undernourished, almost 1 in 10 people. And there might be any number of causes for the recent increase in 2020 and 2021. You might think the pandemic could have had a role with the effects it had on income around the world, people's ability to move, costs of food and other goods. You might think the Ukrainian war with the shock to agricultural commodity markets, it did have some effect on wheat prices, at least in 21, we're pretty sure. So there's some effects there too. So there are many factors that can go into this, but it's interesting to see the general pattern here that in terms of both absolute numbers and percentage of people, it fell for some years here, fairly flat, and then picked back up lately. And I would like to take a big look here, a very broad look, which we can do thanks to a Journal of Economic Literature study that I think is really quite interesting. And this author, Ograda, tried to look at famines over time and to look back in history to think about how big they were in terms of the human loss and what caused them. So Ograda, goes back to the late 1600s in France and Ireland and Finland and calculates the how many people died because of the famine in each case, with maybe 3 to 13% of the population dying during a famine 300 or 400 years ago. Ograda attributes this, I should say, he goes into a lot about how you estimate these numbers. It's not simple by any means, but these are the estimates that Ograda comes up with, and these are the causes to which Ograda attributes the famine. So harvest, weather, a pest, a plant disease and policy problem, a lot of droughts with other things going on. And the point Ograda makes here is the death rate over time has fallen overall from 3 to 13% over time and before 1944, and after 1944, generally lower. Some exceptions, but generally lower cost of famine in terms of the human loss. The other point Ograda makes is the changing factors that cause famine, going from bad weather and poor harvests and droughts being a key point for a lot of these to more and more cases. Ograda says the severe ones are caused by policy decisions or civil war or other factors that humans help to cause. And so Ograda's paper it's a fascinating look at famines and food insecurity over time, and it's an interesting perspective to take about how the causes and costs of famines have changed over time. So while the previous chart showed a decrease and then a flattening, the long-term perspectives from Ograda generally paint a decrease in the death loss from famines and a change in the causes over time. So now I'd like to shift gears a bit and go to policy since it came up, but let's go to US policy and current discussion. And so the US Farm Bill is the big agricultural policy. It's negotiated and agreed about every 5 years, although that varies a bit. It might be 4 years, it might be 6 years, it might be whatever. But about every 5 years, a farm bill is passed. And the Farm Bill is the agricultural policy package. So it includes in it the agricultural nutrition assistance, conservation programs together. And they're agreed into a set. And first, we're going to look at the agricultural side of it, the ones focused on agriculture. and how much has been spent on those each year over the last several years. So this is thanks to the outlook that just came out, in particular Pat Westhoff, the director of the Institute, where I work. So how much is spent each fiscal year? Oops, sorry, don't see that, don't cheat. So how much is spent each fiscal year in billions of dollars? So these two kind of go together. Commodity programs, we can be very technical to talk about which specific program, but generally the point is these are the ones paid to producers, tied somehow to what they produce, their land they use for production or could use for production or so on. So it's somewhat tied to agriculture to varying extent and to production process to varying extents. And it can be very important, but very detailed very quickly. So commodity programs and crop insurance is a subsidy to producers to buy crop insurance. So these two together, back in 86, over $20 billion in the fiscal year. And that number fell throughout lower in the 90s, came back up in 2000, once again, peaked over 25 billion, almost 30. And since it's varied about, but it generally has been between maybe 10 billion and 20 billion for these two. So conservation, a big program you might think of there would be conservation reserve program, where people signed long-term contracts to set their land out of production and into environmentally approved practices. So that's one, but there are other programs in the environmental group under conservation in the Farm Bill. And those expenditures were fairly small in the late 80s, but have become larger over time and accounted for a few $billion every year of taxpayer expenditures. And then these other ones are more ad hoc. They vary. The MFP, or market facilitation payment, that came with the trade war with China and amounted to more than $10 billion over a couple of years here. Pandemic payments, there's a whole suite of them. Each one has its own complications, its own name, and its own reason and purpose. And those also amount to tens of billions of dollars in recent years, although they are winding down. And then disaster and others. So when there are disasters or some other things, there might be an ad hoc payment made. You can see those can vary quite a bit, and maybe because disasters vary quite a bit, or maybe other reasons. So these vary over time, and lately have the spending on this basket of farm-related programs in general has been higher at over $40 billion in these last 2 years, and still over $30 billion than most past years. These are nominal dollars. So if we want to be careful and really compare what they buy, we use real dollars and compare them to our things. But in terms of nominal expenditures, at least, we're spending more on this set of policies recently than we did in the past. So we all know that well, maybe we don't, but in the Farm Bill expenditures, that was the farm commodity program. It also covers nutrition assistance like SNAP. And more money goes to SNAP than to the farm programs. But how much more? Do you think that the expenditure on nutrition assistance is about double the farm-related programs? The sum of, I'm going to go up a slide, sorry, the sum of these two? Do you think nutrition assistance is about double that expenditure? More than the commodity programs, but not that much higher, not double, or more than double the commodity program expenditures? How much more is spent on nutrition programs than farm-related programs in the US Farm Bill? Diane already knows the answer. So here's the span of the Farm Bill programs. This is from Congressional Budget Office originally. So the farm commodity programs in 23 fiscal year, the current fiscal year, 1.5 billion, crop insurance, 15.5. So you put those together, that's about $17 billion, $17 billion for those farm related programs. SNAP alone, $127 billion. So 17 to 127, that's more than double. It's more than 5 times. That's many times more on nutrition assistance program in the Farm Bill than on the farm commodity and crop insurance. The Farm Bill is about conservation, nutrition. There's a whole suite of different things it covers, and don't think of it only as a farm-focused program when it does cover so many other things. Congressional Budget Office also gives us estimates going out over the next 10 years. So they average out. So this is a sum, not per year, but if you divide by 10, you get an idea of the per year cost, right? So they expect the farm commodity program, these expenditures to go up on an annual basis. So 1.5 they see as maybe low. They see as $6 billion per year is more likely. Crop insurance, almost $10 billion a year. SNAP, about $120 billion a year on average over the next 10 years, according to CBO estimates. And Congressional Budget Office is part of Congress in a sense, but it's an office that answers them to estimate budget costs. And when there are discussions about farm bill options, the CBO are the ones who will come up with cost estimates that help people understand what can be afforded and what cannot be afforded, and also how it fits relative to budget limits. So the CBA are some of the most important applied economists in policymaking, actually, and you may never have heard of them, but they have a lot to say about what's possible, budgetarily speaking. So that's the Farm Bill, and farm-related commodities are a small share in that. So what do you think the share of farm commodity programs, including crop insurance, are relative to the total US federal budget? So that was just the Farm Bill, right? That was the Farm Bill. So now let's think about all federal expenditures. So within all federal expenditures, about what percent goes on farm-related commodities? Closer to 1%, 3%, 5%? Okay. It's less than 1%. So if we have that 17 billion sum of crop insurance and the farm-related commodities, $17 billion in the last fiscal year for which we have data from CBO, of $6.3 trillion, that's less than 1%. Nutrition assistance, well, SNAP, there's more to nutrition assistance than SNAP, but SNAP here, relative to that, about 2.5%, give or take. And then you can see the larger categories up here: Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, and so on. And there are a whole lot that's left out here. But the relative role of these farm commodity programs in the total budget, and even SNAP in the total budget, I mean, together we might be less than 3% on Farm Bill programs here as a share of the total budget. I shall say that of the $6.3 trillion expenditures here, about 1.3 trillion or so is from deficit, right? So we have revenues that might be about 5 trillion. We spend 6.3 trillion, so the 1.3 or so roughly is deficit spending. So I thought it'd be maybe useful for those of us who've watched the budget discussions over time to look back and see how the debt's evolved, because the deficit is how much is borrowed each year. The debt is the total sum of all the borrowing that hasn't been paid off over time. So it's just like a family almost, in a certain sense. That you can take debt 1 year, but debt is different from a 1 year borrowing. So if we go back over time, the US federal debt is a percent of GDP from St. Louis Federal Reserve, great data source for macroeconomics. 1980, the start here, about 30%. So if I take the total amount owed, public debt, federal public debt, relative to the gross domestic product, or the total amount of output of the country, it'd be about 30% in 1980. It crossed 50% in 89. It actually fell in the 90s. So you might remember the Cold War deficit dividend, the tech boom. We actually ran a surplus, and there was talk of eliminating the debt at some point. So it fell back down to 54% there in 2001. And then it rose after that somewhat. And then during the Great Recession, it jumped up to 82%. 100% after a while, and stabilized there. And during the pandemic, it jumped to 135%, and now about 120%. This isn't a household, so I shouldn't make any comparison like that too strongly. Although many households might have debts greater than their income each year. You know, I think a lot of first-time home buyers might have a mortgage that's this big with income that big for a while. But still, this is a way to put a scale on the debt and put a point on budget negotiations. So policy goes beyond expenditures and borrowing. It's also about other things. There's money spent on the programs outside the Farm Bill, of course, as I showed. There are also taxes, right? There's different tax rates and tax credits for different activities. So a tax credit is a tax reduction if you do certain things. So in biodiesel, for example, if you have biodiesel used domestically, you get a tax credit for that. There are also regulations. And regulations might have very little to do with expenditures and taxes, but still could have a big influence. One example are the renewable fuel standards, or biofuel use mandates. So these are requirements that the EPA has to implement. There's a law passed by Congress, signed by the president, 2 laws actually, 2 packages that made it. But the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, implements the biofuel mandates. So they are the ones who are required to set the targets for different types of biofuel use. It can be incredibly complicated in ways for me as an economist that are exciting, about overlapping mandates and which feedstocks go to make which biofuels and so on. But a key point is that this mandated use can affect agricultural markets. If the mandated use of cornstarch ethanol gets higher, that's more demand for ethanol, more demand for corn, and maybe a higher corn price, for example. If the mandates push up the use of biodiesel or similar fuels, then maybe that can put pressure on those feedstocks. So what's the feedstock for biodiesel? So soybean oil is one, another vegetable oils. So for example, from our projections, we have the share of US soybean oil in the billions of pounds of soybean oil, vegetable oil made from soybeans, including those grown in Missouri, a big crop for us. So how much goes to biofuel? So if you go back 8 years, it was about 5 billion pounds, but over time it's increased. And because of a new fuel type that's becoming more common called renewable diesel, not really biodiesel, but renewable diesel because it's chemically equivalent to diesel. And so you can be substitute for it immediately. There's been quite a surge in the use of soybean oil for biodiesel. And this has been quite interesting to watch. There's the potential that more soybean oil in the US will be used for biofuel than for food in the future. And the US used to export a few billion pounds a year of soybean oil, and that's kind of gone away. And maybe as long as there's this demand for soybean oil domestically, that won't come back. And it's not just soybean oil. There are lots of other vegetables that compete with soybean oil for biodiesel use or for other uses, including canola oil we might import from Canada, palm oil, and a whole mishmash of things. So it's an interesting story as well. So I think I'm okay on time. So I'd like to do some quick cross-country comparisons. Diane told me that some of her Asian affairs students from Korea might be here. So maybe this is the point where they want to wake back up if they've fallen asleep. So we're going to do some quick cross-country comparisons. So here's a question. I didn't include Korea. I'm sorry. I learned this too late. Could have done Korea if I had known. I'm sorry. I failed my audience. But let's consider U.S. agricultural policy across 4 countries. The U.S., of course, the European Union, Canada, and Mexico. So from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, we can see data that shows the share of farm receipts that's caused by agricultural policy. Not regulations, but subsidies, tariffs, things like that. So in which of these 4 countries do you think the share of farm receipts caused by agricultural policy is the highest? In which of these 4 is the share of farm receipts caused by agricultural policy the highest? US, EU, Canada, Mexico. 3, 2, 1. So here are the data from OECD. OECD. So the United States, this dark line here. So in 1986, about 25%, about $1 out of every 4 of farm receipts in the country was caused by subsidies or tariffs or export subsidies or other policies like that. And over time, it fell a bit. It came back up here around 2001, back up over 20%, and then trend down again. It went below 10%. Below $1 out of every 10, and now it is about 10%. So about $1 out of every 10 in the US in the 2021 was caused by agricultural policy. The top one here, the European Union. So back in the 80s, about 40% of farm receipts was caused by agricultural policy, according to the OECD and the European Union. And that fell over time, unsteadily, but fell. And now it's less than 20%, or in the most recent data, I'm sorry, it's less than 20% of farm receipts in the European Union are caused by agricultural policy. I included our neighbors, Canada here. So Canada back in the 80s is very close to the European Union and fell over time. And now it's sometimes lower than the US, sometimes comparable. And there are other countries within the OECD group that actually have even lower support. Australia and New Zealand famously did a lot in the 80s to reduce their subsidies to agriculture, and their subsidy rates by this measure are even lower. Their support to producers constitutes a very small share of farm receipts. The other one here is fun to watch. I should say, some countries are going to be higher than anything I show here. I've got the EU at the top, but if I had included Korea, it would be higher. Japan would be higher. Norway, Switzerland. There are some countries that are higher than this EU path. But I'd like to go to Mexico real fast. So if you look back in time, now Mexico is similar to the US and Canada, about 10%. And it's varied, but in the past it was actually negative. The sum of agricultural policies in Mexico in the past at times essentially was a tax on agriculture. It reduced farm receipts relative to what would have happened without agriculture. And there's a wonderful study a long time ago. It's been updated by a World Bank team. And a finding was that countries that are less developed, or in the least developed countries, often tax agriculture. They might have very few places to get money. They might not have a working system for an income tax or anything, but taxing exports of agricultural products or some processing stage might be institutionally possible, a way to make money, and it might be one of their few choices. So in the past, at least, and even maybe today, countries that are less well developed tend to tax agriculture. And as countries got more money, that tended to change. So, Mexico, if we go back farther in time, might have been more likely to tax agriculture. Now, about 10% of farm receipts in Mexico are caused by agricultural policy. For other countries like China, it's been a shift from a taxation to a support. So it's interesting change in trends there. As countries develop, they tend to shift from taxing agriculture to subsidizing, and the form of subsidies can also change in terms of how they subsidize, whether they do it through price changes or direct subsidies. I'll skip that for now and skip into some policy questions. So I like to start kind of wrap some things up and talk about some of the policy things, then leave it. So Farm Bill debate. So the Farm Bill debate's going on now. It's a Farm Bill debate because we're right up to the next Farm Bill. The 2018 one is coming to its 5-year limit, so to speak. So there's debates. A lot of it gets very technical very quickly, but the debate will determine or will affect how much money is spent on different commodities for corn, soybeans, and so on. There are trigger levels in some of these policies, conditions under which payments are made, or payments might get larger or smaller. So what should those trigger levels be? And there are also discussion of payment limits. What is the maximum cap for payments, direct payments to different producers or different people, I'm sorry. Nutrition assistance, there's a lot of discussion now about work requirements. Should people meet certain work requirements in order to qualify for SNAP or to receive SNAP benefits? Or should there be different limits on what foods can be paid for with SNAP benefits? And conservation, for me, a big unknown. There's a lot. The Inflation Reduction Act includes a lot of environmentally oriented policies, and what's the future of those? And there's a lot of technical details about how spending works. For biofuel mandates, that's going on right now. Like I said, the EPA has sets biofuel targets, and that means they have to do this routinely, and that's almost always on the table. So you might often hear about different people quoting the press, be it for Renewable Fuel Association or American Petroleum Institute or others, arguing about the relative merits of different targets for biofuel use, and the overall budget. That's in the news right now as well. And if we look beyond the now over the next few years, you can think of trade policy priorities. We have a lot of bilateral, regional, multilateral agreements. Bilateral agreements with Korea, with Australia, with whoever. We have regional agreements like US MCA, US, Mexico, Canada, and multilateral agreements like the WTO that are in place. And maybe they can keep going as they are. Maybe there's some reasons to change things there. And there's always the question of, are there any new negotiations out there? Domestic policy, agriculture policy, just what are the relative priorities? Excuse me, in terms of the farm level policies, nutrition policies, conservation, and so on. What are the priorities and how to achieve those priorities? Environmental policies, including climate change, of course, water use, and so on. And again, the overall budget. That seems a pretty likely topic, the mix of tax and spending and borrowing and where that's going. So I've kind of tried to cover a lot of things here. I was asked to go from Boone County to the world. So you've seen a bit of Boone County, a bit of the world, and some stuff in between. So I tried to give my sources throughout, so you can see that I pulled some stuff from the Research Institute where I'm lucky enough to work, FAPRI, also from University of Missouri's Food Security website, which is a fun one. Also, the Food and Agriculture Organization is part of the United Nations. They're a great data source for global food and agricultural indicators. It's a great place to go for that. Economic Research Service. So if you want to learn more about U.S. agriculture, that's a great source of facts about agricultural food and so on in the United States. Congressional Budget Office, if you just want to learn more about taxation, where it comes from, where it goes, CBO is a great resource. The Federal Reserve in St. Louis is a wonderful database you can download. You can probably get an app from them. The OECD, where I used to work for international comparisons of policies, all great sources. And so with that, I'm probably going to wrap up. Thank you for your attention, and I was going to let me stop sharing. Thanks. Hi, Greg.
That was wonderful, Wyatt. Gosh, you covered so much territory in that presentation. I know I have questions spinning in my head, but I might kind of pose a couple if you're willing to take a couple. I guess one question is that one issue you looked at the biofuels, and how much does the move to biofuels affect food food costs. And, has that been good to substitute biofuels for fossil fuels and other types of fuels? Or have we gone down a rabbit hole that's going to lead us in a direction we really shouldn't have gone?
Thank you, Lauren. So I'm always nervous about good and bad questions. They scare me because that's even on the most basic question or seemingly basic question, that can have huge subjective assessment about the relative merits of things. It's certainly the case that adding demand for agricultural products would tend to push up the prices. So whether the biofuel rush was caused by higher petroleum prices in 2005 and 7, or the mandates, or both to some extent, the fact is more biofuels probably means more pressure on agricultural markets to produce more and higher prices for other things. It's really a mix because, okay, so people bought more biodiesel, but that means more expensive soybean oil, but cheaper soybean meal that's used to feed animals. So actually, some food prices might not have gone up as much because of those sorts of cross effects. So it's complicated, but overall, it's probably more expensive agriculture commodities and some positive effect on food prices. But is it worth it? So that means higher food prices, potentially to some extent, particularly for some things, but also just displacing some petroleum use. Well, how do you personally assess energy and security and the risks of, or the benefits of not having to import petroleum, to which this has helped contribute? And I think that's a pretty subjective decision for everybody on the call. How do you do this trade-off? And it's not mine to tell. There's certainly a trade-off there somewhere. Hang on a sec.
There might be some questions in the chat.
Yeah, there is.
I can't.
Winifred Caldwell, I hope I got your name right. I'm sorry. So the market facilitation payments. So the MFP. So during the trade war, remember the trade war was the U.S. and China had a trade war. So there was a disagreement, and they started to say, "Well, we're not going to take your stuff anymore." So the U.S. stopped taking certain things or put tariffs on certain things from China, and China started putting tariffs on things from the U.S. And soybeans was one of the things in that mix, as well as other agricultural products like certain pork products. So here are these tariffs on Chinese imports of soybeans, pork products, and other things from the United States. That means the U.S. had more difficulty exporting, and so U.S. internal prices would be pressured lower. And part of the response by the administration at the time was to introduce the market facilitation payments that were intended to kind of offset there's a technical way to say it's legally very important, but I don't know. I'm an economist, I'm sorry, but the payments were meant to offset the price loss in that market. They weren't kind of a global compensation. And some economists have estimated that it overcompensated after taking out other things that went on. But that was to offset the price loss in that market in some sense. And for soybeans, that's important. China's the #1 soybean importer in the world, and the US is a huge soybean exporter, producer and exporter. So for soybeans alone, that was important. That was a lot of the numbers I showed. So I hope that answered your question. Are there addressing? So yeah, so the climate change, yeah. So I think a lot of the climate change stuff I've seen so far has not been in the Farm Bill. I thought a lot of it's been in other legislative instruments, but it doesn't mean it can't. The Farm Bill is what the policymakers write and sign. So I don't know if I would think it could be added. To some extent, this is politics and how people balance interests and so on. And I'm not going to be able to predict that. But right now, at least up to now, I don't think most of the climate change has been in the Farm Bill. Some exceptions might be research dollars. Some of the funding for research through the Farm Bill does focus on climate change mitigation or adaptation, for example. But in terms of practices, I don't think there's a big dollar amount there as opposed to the Inflation Reduction Act, where I think there is a slug of climate change oriented stuff, and that has to do with agriculture as well.
There's another question kind of related. I can read that to you. Since Diane can't see those, is there a movement toward unprocessed plant-based eating for better conservation of water and soil, less pollution, and better human health?
Thanks for the question, Linda Green. To my knowledge, there's not a huge one. People's tastes and preferences evolve, and there have been changes going on. But for example, I think a lot of us have been surprised that at how strong red meat consumption has been in the U.S. over the last couple of decades, how strong it's been in terms of the quantity people consume and their willingness to spend on red meats, given what we hear about changing diets and so on. And this isn't just the Atkins diet sort of thing. This is a pretty persistent, strong demand for red meats overall. So that's an average or an aggregate, and I'm sure there are people for whom it's different. But as a rule, I don't see consumer shifts, at least up to now, as being responsible for a lot of change in water use and so on. Not overall. Should
How about-
preface that this isn't my usual area of play, but that's my impression from what I've read.
Got another question, one from Sharon. What are the major crops in Boone County, and what is their dollar value annually? It's a quiz for you.
You got me. Wow. Where would I? I know where I'd go to look, but I don't know those numbers offhand. I'm very sorry. I was surprised. I remember learning 30 years ago, 40 years ago now, 30, that Boone County had tobacco allotments back in the day, that there had been tobacco grown in Boone County. They had allotments under the old tobacco program to grow tobacco under the policy for tobacco way back when. So I was really, maybe Greg knows a story about that better than I do, Greg Schuler. But yeah, I was really surprised to learn that Boone County's had a mixed experience, but I don't know offhand. For Missouri as a whole, soybeans is probably the big crop, right? But and there's a lot of dairy, there's a lot of poultry in the South, eggs and whatnot. We grow a lot of animals, have a lot of cow-calf operations by number, but other states have more volume of animals, even though we have lots of farms. But in terms of Boone County, no, I'm sorry, you got me.
I'm curious, we know that there's a lot of gridlock in Congress and very difficult for any agreements to get through or any laws to be passed. How contentious will the debate on the Farm Bill be? Or do you find that polarization in that debate as much as in other issues?
So that's a fun one. So I don't do political science, but I sure watch it. I'm sure interested by this. I've always been pretty amazed at the Farm Bill and how it works. That package that includes nutrition assistance and farm programs and conservation, it seems like there's somehow in the legislative process of all the, every 5 years they get together, and it's not necessarily a friendly, happy time, but maybe because it spans so many things, they agree. And it has bipartisan support more often than you might think, given what you hear in Congress. I think the Farm Bill is, and there have been years where it sounds like everything in DC is going haywire, and yet here's a Farm Bill. So I think the legislatures, I think they have an interesting strategy for the Farm Bill. It seems to have helped that get along, and there have been exceptions. There have been rough years, but generally I would say that because of its composition, perhaps, and its scope, that there's a bit of a balance built into that to make sure that people negotiate whether more should be spent here or there. But the packages seem to happen. It's really interesting to watch.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe we need more farm bills going through Congress.
Maybe.
Very good. Okay. On kind of a different topic, less developed countries often protest against the subsidies that developed countries give to their agriculture sector because that's the area where they can compete. They grow those. How would you respond to a less developed country that is saying it's unfair that we subsidize our agriculture to the extent that we do?
So I'm kind of like him. My job is not to defend. So for me, it's like, okay, that's, but certainly we all see their point, right? That if a country's trying to export something that U.S. subsidizes, or lots of developed countries subsidize, and push down the price of that good in world markets, it makes it hard for a developing country that doesn't have that same sort of capacity for subsidy to compete against a lower priced good. So we all understand that argument. Certainly, I'd say there are a couple things to watch out for. One, is there are also winners. It was an interesting thing during the biofuel boom to hear the argument also that the biofuel boom is raising prices and hurting consumers in developing countries, which was true. it's an interesting thing. There are winners and losers when the price changes. A high price is a good price if you're a seller, it's a bad price if you're a buyer, and a low price the opposite. So it's interesting to think the biofuel boom, the price surge, 2005, 2007, it was really interesting to stop and think, oh, wait, there's winners and losers in all these countries. So some people hurt, some benefit from a low price. Second is the share of subsidies in developed countries relative to the total value of market receipts has fallen over time. Maybe it's still too high or low. I'm not saying that, but it's lower than it used to be. So when you think about what drives production of crops in the US, maybe it's market receipts are still the main thing. It's not like they're producing just for subsidies. If subsidies are 10% of their market receipts, maybe it's an equally sized share of their incentives to produce. So it's not just subsidies that cause Missouri to grow soybeans by any means. So there's some things, and there's some details about how policies work that intend to slow down or reduce the production impacts for some countries like the European Union and the US. But certainly there's some effect. If you're giving money to people, there's some effect. That effect encourages them to do it. They produce more. Exactly how much more and exactly how much that drives down the price is a fun debate. But yeah, it has a negative impact on people in developing countries who are trying to produce these same things and compete in the same markets. Yeah.
Greg had a question about ag food technology population dynamics over decades. How would you assess, are they all moving in sync? Are the dynamics out of whack? Or
yeah. So there's I remember way back, and this is and Greg knows better than I do, the treadmill idea that agriculture is producing more and more and productivity is growing over time and tends to outpace the demand growth. Demand growth being driven by incomes of people and population growth over time, that these grow at a certain pace and increase food demand only so fast, yet agriculture productivity keeps just driving along and pushes down real crop prices. And that's the treadmill idea. And it's a fascinating idea that seemed true. If you looked at real price of agriculture commodities, you saw them going down. There were the early 70s where they jumped up, but then they went down again. And actually that biofuel boom and the food versus fuel debate that you mentioned before was fascinating, 2005-07, because it seemed to have turned around and opened up a whole, and that plus anticipation of climate change opened a whole new discussion that maybe real prices are going to be rising in the future. And who knows about the future, but population growth is slowing. The part of economic development where people consume a lot more food is kind of past us. In a country like the US, more income doesn't translate to a lot more food consumption. We change what we buy, but maybe not the overall calories or overall consumption quantity. So a lot of people are now wondering if maybe we'll go back to the decreasing real price trend for agriculture commodities going forward for the long run. That we'll kind of go back to that old trend as the current things settle, if they settle. But it's a bit of a different world. In the last 6 or 7 years, the globalization has kind of shifted, and it is a bit of a different world now than would have been just 10 years ago. And it is hard to imagine what the prices could do.
were there any other questions in the chat that we didn't address at all?
I think we got them all.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts for us going forward? Prices going up, prices going down? Is the outlook for agriculture good for individual farmers? Incomes going up? Yeah. Anything that.
So actually tomorrow we have the WOMAC conference. So that's named after Abner Womack, who co-founded the Institute. We'll do that out at Bradford Farm. I think you might even still be able to enroll or walk. You can walk up actually. So I think it starts tomorrow at 8 or 8:30. So if you go to our website, fapri.missouri.edu, you can see it and you can show up. And we'll talk about the near and 10-year outlook for agriculture commodity markets, including farm income. I should have put that ad up front, Diane. You saved me. Oh, thank you.
So I just put that link in the chat.
Thank you, Lauren. You guys will make me look professional. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay.
And we are right at 1 o'clock. So I want to thank you, Dr. Thompson, for being here. Diane, any final words from you?
No, just a big thank you to Wyatt. That was a wonderful presentation, and you covered so much ground, and I know I'm much better informed than I was 1 hour ago, and appreciate all your work and time you put into this.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Lauren, for hosting, and thanks everyone for participating. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wyatt. See you tomorrow.
See you, Don.
Thanks,
See you, Greg.
everyone. Join us again in May 9th, Lunch and Learn at noon. We'll be hearing about mental health from professional counselor Vanita Khanna. So join us then. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.